Hello there, this is chapter 44, EMS response to terrorism. So you all know the term weapons of mass destruction, and we know the purpose, of course, is to disrupt a country or area, um, to cause death and destruction if possible. Remember that, you know, even though we think of these large events like 9/11 or something along those lines, sometimes, many times, it's very possible these could be very difficult to detect. I'll give you, for instance, someone decides they want to cause harm to a country. They infect themselves with the disease like maybe Ebola. They plan it so that they land in the country a couple days before they become symptomatic and thereby can spread the disease. They interact with the community, they spread the disease. 21 to 30 days later, you start seeing people that are sick. Well, I don't know how many times I've gone on calls where someone has nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, which are some of the symptoms of Ebola. Um, I'm not going to come to scene thinking, hey, Ebola, because it's the last thing on my mind. So I'm going to treat this person, transport them to the hospital. The fire crew is going to be there and all that. And about 21 days later, I get sick and my family gets sick and the firefighters get sick and their families get sick. And you can see it spreads exponentially. So really the problem with all this is that, when it comes to EMS, fire, and police, we're the ones probably going to take the brunt of these types of attacks. Now, obviously, the large explosion happens suddenly, wide devastation and destruction. Again, you might get called to an explosion somewhere, a building got blown up or something, and what no one realizes yet that maybe this was a radioactive device and maybe the whole place is, contaminated. So again, it can be a problem because it sometimes is hard to detect. Also, because this is not only a multiple casualty incident and it's not only a hazmat incident, but it is a crime, so it's a crime scene as well. So what makes that whole scene complicated is you're going to have multiple agencies vying for control, and it's going to be a very complex, very, very disorganized scene which you're going to be, driving into. So don't be surprised that things don't run quite as smoothly as you would imagine. So for us as EMS responders, as fire responders, what are our roles essentially? The one thing that we have to learn is that, even though we've learned about online medical direction, calling the base hospital for orders from a physician, what happens in these large events is a doctor will actually, or doctors will actually come to the scene or nearby the scene of the event. They'll set up treatment tents. And once they're on site, you as the EMT involved in this particular event, in whatever capacity you're involved in anyway, you're going to be working under the orders of the physician on site. So there's no more any need to call the base hospital. Everything's going to be done by some type of person there for you. And everything that you do is done under the direction of the person or the doctor on site. Uh, as EMTs, more than likely, you're probably going to be driving an ambulance and you're going to be transporting patients to and from the scene. Um, this scene right here, these pictures, I think this is a staging area for Hurricane Katrina, as I remember from the picture I got. But we just realized that your job is going to be going to the scene, picking up a patient, driving them to the hospital. Once you're at the hospital, offload the patient, do your paperwork, get cleaned up, and then go right back to the scene for another patient. So you're going to be doing this kind of back and forth for as long as they need you to be there. It could be hours, it could be, who knows, even days. So your role primarily is going to be a transport. If you are on an ambulance, of course, if you're a firefighter EMT, you might have roles in some type of triage process or the MCI, protocol and all that. Even if you're on an ambulance, they might, if they need scribes and worker bees and helpers and people to do triage. They might call you guys in to do that as part of the incident command system. Now, different kinds of weapons. So these are conventional weapons. These are the explosives. This is, dynamite and TNT and all those horrible things. Remember the three phases of a blast? We talked about that in another lecture: primary, secondary, and tertiary. The primary blast, the expanding gases, is what usually kills people if they do die initially, anyway. And what happens is it pops their lungs, it pops their vital hollow organs, and they die from that. Again, if they don't die from the primary blast, the flying debris, and of course the injuries from being thrown against something can finish them off, so to speak. If you think about it, the way a person dies of an explosion like this is usually because their lungs collapse and they can't breathe. In fact, most everything we talk about here in this lecture, whether it's chemical related or whether it's biological related or something like an explosive, pretty much all this stuff indirectly or directly affects the ability to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, which ultimately leads to their death. Incendiary devices. This is going to be, propane gas, gasoline, kerosene, something that burns, especially if it's something that sticks to the person, very tenacious, like napalm type of product. And of course, obviously, you're going to have these thermal burns to the skin. But remember, they breathe this stuff in. The hot gases get into their lungs. The lungs get burned, and the lungs fill with fluid, and they can't breathe. So again, they can't exchange gases, and ultimately, they die from suffocation in one manner or another if they do die from their burns. Chemical agents. So all different kinds of agents. Nerve agents are basically, what do they sound like? They affect the nerve, the nervous system. So this chemical or an organophosphate's been around a long time. You can still go into Home Depot and Lowe's and buy products that have organophosphates in them, and these are usually for gardening and all that. Down in Mexico, they have this shampoo which has organophosphates in it. It's not sold in the United States. People do bring it across the border, and it has caused some problems for EMS here in the county because it is a powder, as I remember, and it aerosolizes and people can breathe it in. It doesn't even have to be inhaled. It can just be on their skin and it can be absorbed through the skin. But you also have things like Roundup and other types of products. So how this all works is that we have what's called a parasympathetic nervous system, and it runs on what's called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is the messenger substance that sends messages through our nerves and through these clefts where our nerves meet. And we also have another substance called acetylcholine esterase. And what that does is it limits that message. So you have these messages going through this cleft of nerves, and the esterase comes in and says, okay, slow down, that's good enough, and it kind of slows things down. The problem with organophosphates is that it inhibits the production of acetylcholine esterase, which allows this uncontrolled rapid cascade of messages leaving your body, or going through your body, should I say, which leads to this what's called a sludge effect. So this is the parasympathetic system, and now what's happening is you have uncontrolled release of fluids from your body. So you're drooling, milk product is coming from your nipples, you're urinating uncontrollably, you're defecating uncontrollably, you have nausea, you have vomiting, it's all coming out, all ends at the same time, and ultimately leads to non-hemorrhagic hypovolemic shock because you're losing all these fluids. The problem with all those things, like I mentioned, it can be absorbed through your skin, through inhalation, or orally. So as a fire crew or an EMS crew, someone has a white powder on them and they're exhibiting signs of sludge, you got to think that powder is toxic to us as well as them. It becomes a hazmat scene for us. Vesicants, these were developed back in World War I to fight on the lines in France. And what would happen is the soldiers, because they dug these deep trenches um, on both sides of the line, they were lobbing more conventional shells back and forth each other, but they were kind of hard to hit each other. It was kind of hard to get to them because they were deep in these holes. So they invented this gas called mustard gas, and what it would do, they would basically shoot this shell to the one side or the other, and the shell would land near the trench, and then the gas would be released. It's heavier than air gas, so it would float along the ground and then would fall into these trenches, and it would infect these soldiers. They would breathe it in, they get on their skin, and within 24 hours or so, they'd start having symptoms like all the blisters. But they're going to breathe this in, and those blisters are going to be inside their lungs. Their lungs are going to fill with fluid, and they're probably going to die from, again, respiratory problems. So again, this happens. It takes a few hours to take effect. You're not even aware you're being affected by it until it starts to take hold. This is something that can be, from what I've read, fairly easily produced out of basic chemicals you can buy almost anywhere. So if someone wanted to make up a batch of mustard gas, and they have the know-how, they could easily weaponize something like this. And imagine if they found some way to release it into a movie theater or something along those lines. Cyanide, you already learned about cyanide, and of course you realize that it blocks the mitochondria in the cells from using oxygen. So the person, even though they've got tons of oxygen in their bloodstream, they just can't use it as an energy source, so they kind of suffocate at the cellular level. Obviously, high flow oxygen, with like pretty much all of these conditions, your number one treatment is going to be high flow oxygen, either by bag valve mask ventilations or non-rebreather mask, whatever is appropriate with this. Riot control agents. Primarily in EMS, you're going to encounter pepper spray or OC gas. The one thing about pepper spray in particular is it comes out as a spray. It's very tenacious, it's very sticky, it's very oily, and it gets on their skin, and of course it irritates their eyes, and they eyes water, and they nose snots, and they have trouble breathing, and they get incapacitated by this. Obviously, that's what it's for. The problem is that it's very oily, it's very sticky, and it's easily transferred from the patient to your gurney, to your straps, to you, and you can't really see it. So you're touching the patient, and later, 2 hours later, it's on your sleeve, and you wipe your eyes with your sleeve, and now you've been affected by the pepper spray. Your book does talk about treatment for this, and what they say is to flush with copious amounts of water. And I understand, that's what they say. The problem with all this is if you have a person who's been pepper sprayed, and you put water on the pepper spray, it reactivates it. It makes it worse. And because it's an oily substance, it really doesn't get rid of it that well because it just kind of washes over it. So my recommendation and what we do in the field, and this is purely just an in the field situation, is I will take, we have, like in the back of the ambulance, there's an air conditioning unit, a vent. So I'll turn on the AC in the back, and I will put this person's face in the AC blower, and the air blowing over their face dries out the pepper spray and reduces the activation or even deactivates it, to the point where then they can get to the hospital, and they have special soaps to remove the oily pepper spray at the hospital with less kind of irritation. Toxic chemicals. These are just chemicals that you can find almost anywhere. You can go to Home Depot and Lowe's and probably Vaughn's and all those other places. But someone in the know, they could mix these common household chemicals together and create all kinds of horrible things. This is just basic cleaning materials. Also, things like chlorine gas, you see them a lot in these larger pool complexes, like at the YMCA or at the college, and they have this chlorine gas, this chlorine system that keeps the pool from becoming full of bacteria and urine and all the happy stuff. But these can release, creating chlorine gas, which is again fairly flies fairly low to the ground. People breathe it in, they get overwhelmed by eye irritation, respiratory irritation, and all that. Same with ammonia gas. Ammonia gas is used a lot in water treatment plants, and they can have gas leaks. I've been on both chlorine gas leaks and I've been on ammonia gas leaks before. The chlorine gas leak was at a YMCA, and the ammonia gas was at one of the dams. They have a water treatment plant, one of the dams here in the county, and the tank broke free or something, and this ammonia gas, and everyone got affected. Also, just from a basic perspective of you could take bleach and ammonia, something you'd use normally for like washing your floors, you put them together, and it can create a really bad gas that can lead to disability or even death. There's this thing called detergent suicide, where you see the picture down below. You see the signs on the windows. The signs basically say EMS fire, don't open these doors because there's a deadly gas inside. So this person committed suicide. They took a large bucket, and usually it's one of those like Tide buckets or Cheer buckets, and they pour various chemicals in, and these chemicals mix together, creating this deadly gas, and the person dies from inhaling this gas. It's a way of committing suicide. And luckily for this person, they were conscientious enough to warn first responders of this. Biological weapons. So this is going to be some type of disease like the Ebola. And again, it's designed to cause an epidemic, and this can be delayed because obviously, like we talked about earlier, there's an incubation period and all that. So just some of the ones out there that can be weaponized, but it needs to be delivered in a way that is either aerosolized, so everyone breathes it in. It's not a disease, or not a disease process that you can pass to someone else. It has to be brought in from respiratory or whatever it might be. But same idea. It's still going to be, they're going to have the effects and all that, and it's going to be a problem. Radiological devices, of course, these are nuclear devices and dirty bombs. It could just be some kind of radioactive material, possibly. And the purpose is to disperse by the explosion all this material out and cause this whole area to become contaminated. And of course, people who are in the area are going to get radiation sickness, and they could possibly die from it or get very, very sick. Lastly, in all this is it's not a new concept, but it's been around a number of years, and this was brought up in the city of San Diego about 6 or 7 years ago, and after doing research with all the various school shootings and mass shootings we've had in this country, unfortunately, over the last 10 or 15 years or so, the previous philosophy is stand back and call SWAT. But the problem with that is SWAT might take up to 45 minutes to get there. In the meantime, the active shooter is shooting actively, unfortunately. So the concept came up about 5-6 years ago that, hey, why don't the initial police go in and engage the shooter, keep him busy, so to speak, by shooting back. And in the meantime, EMS could go in, fire and EMS could go in behind the police officers who were engaging the active shooter and start pulling out victims. Again, this is not a new concept. It's just not a very well accepted concept by EMS. So this was completely, no pun intended, shot down by the City of San Diego Fire Department. They said there's no way they're going to go in with the police officers under fire unless they were armed with all their proper gear, which they don't have. So, this task force concept is out there. I'm sure there's some states and some cities that use it, but not here in San Diego County. And we're done with this lecture.